IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Check out my man Trevor trying to be like me with the spectacles on today. We're ready to rock and roll, Trev. I'm very excited about this because this is a big matchup for Notre Dame. We're going to preview a lot of we're going to be previewing Notre Dame versus Georgia Tech all week. The Irish are taking on the 5-2 Yellow Jackets. This is a very quality football team in Georgia Tech that Notre Dame is going to have to be ready for. We're going to preview all that today. Today, we'll talk a little bit about what's at stake, and we'll talk about the matchup. Tomorrow, we'll dive into some of the stats breakdowns. We'll do our buy, sell, hold. We'll talk game records. Thursday, we are going to do our keys to victory, our prediction. Friday will be a mailbag. I will probably not be here on Friday because I am flying down to Georgia on Friday. And then Saturday, we'll have our post-game shows. Sunday, we will not have an Upon Further review because I'll be flying. Monday, we'll have that. But, man, tons and tons of content that we're going to get to today, Trevor. But before we begin, I got a little special something here right now. I want to give a little special early birthday shout-out to Larry Wind. Larry, Trevor, is a 1965 Notre Dame graduate. Big fan of the Irish Breakdown Show, and he turns 82 on Sunday. But since I won't be doing a show on Saturday or Sunday, I won't be able to wish Larry a happy birthday. And Larry, I just want to let you know that your family has purchased you a membership to the Irish Breakdown message board, the Champions Lounge, and they got you a Shamrock Club membership, which means you are also going to be receiving a cool IB Club mug. And so, Larry, we really thank you for being just such a loyal supporter of ours and daily listener to our show. We really appreciate you, man. And I always love it when Notre Dame grads are watching the show, especially older ones, because they know what great Notre Dame football was about. And so, Larry, thank you, man. Happy early birthday. And we hope that you enjoy it. You'll be getting a breakdown of the Stanford game tonight or tomorrow. I'm going to have my breakdown video and my stats of that game coming out later tonight and tomorrow. Would have had it done yesterday, Trevor, but there's a couple things that happened yesterday that kind of took our time between the Benjamin Morrison injury and then the two commitments. So we'll have that. So now that you're a board member, Larry, you have a chance to check that out. So happy early birthday to you. And I just wanted to thank you for all your support over the years of Irish Breakdown.
Happy birthday, Larry.
So, Trev, it's Georgia Tech time, man. This is a big game for Notre Dame, and we're going to kind of break this show into three segments. And segment one, we're going to kind of talk big picture, what's at stake for Notre Dame in this game? What does Notre Dame have to prove in this game? And we're going to talk about that. And then segment two, we're going to look at the Notre Dame offense against the Georgia Tech defense, and really what does the offense have to prove? What is the matchup going to be like? What makes Georgia Tech such a scrappy, improved defense this season? And they are absolutely a scrappy and improved defense this season. Even the Louisville game, Trevor, when you look at it, they give up 31 points in that game, but Louisville had, I think, two non-offensive touchdowns in that game. You had a blocked field goal, and then obviously the broken up pass that was a backwards pass that ended up getting recovered in the end zone. So they did give up a lot of points there. They gave up a lot of points this past weekend in North Carolina. But, I mean, the one thing North Carolina can do, Trevor, is they can score. The problem is they can't stop anyone else from scoring. That's been kind of the problem with North Carolina. They have now scored 31 points in the game, or 34 points in the game, and lost. They scored 50 points in the game and lost by 20. So it was quite a battle between those two teams this past weekend. And then, of course, one of North Carolina's touchdowns in that game, Trevor, was on special teams, not on defense. So their defense has yet to give up over 30 points in a game this season, Trevor, for a team that gave up 29.5 per game last season. So Tyler Santucci's done a great job. We'll talk about how that matchup was going to look against Notre Dame. And then we'll dive into the third part of the show, Trevor, is really the matchup of, I would say, good on good in this particular game, which is the Notre Dame the Notre Dame defense against the Georgia Tech offense. And we'll talk about that. As far as we know, they have not reported yet on the actual status for Haynes King. And I doubt that they're going to, if he isn't going to play this weekend, I doubt that they're going to say that he's not going to play. They're going to want Notre Dame thinking about that. And so when we break this thing down, we'll talk about what they're going to be like if Haynes King plays and what that could mean for Notre Dame. So just that's kind of the overview of what we're going to do, Trev. But big picture first. I know this isn't a game that a lot of people have circled as like a quote-unquote big game from the standpoint of it's a name opponent. It's not like what people thought A&M was going to be and Florida State was going to be and USC. But this is a big game for Notre Dame. This is a much improved North Carolina football team, and it's going to be a huge test for Notre Dame.
I'm excited to jump into the show today and talk through the threats that Georgia Tech does pose. Notre Dame has a big game down in Atlanta this week, and a lot of people get caught up in, oh, well, they're not ranked. They're 5-2. They already have 2 losses. It's a really good 5-2 football team and one that does pose an interesting challenge to Notre Dame. Stuff that I all know that we're going to dive into throughout the show. But this is a big matchup, especially when you kind of weigh, like I said last week, we're starting to get into that territory of what is Notre Dame going to start to look like for the postseason, and what is this team going to start coming together with? And Notre Dame is starting to gain some momentum offensively. Georgia Tech has a gritty and tough and aggressive defense. So there's a lot to dive into today, man. I'm excited.
When you talk about what's at stake in this game, Trevor, there's a lot of big picture aspects at stake that even go beyond Georgia Tech. And we'll kind of start with those a little bit. And when you look at this Notre Dame football team, they are winners of 4 straight. So it's they need to prove that they can roll. And 3 of those 4 have come by double digits. Their win margins are 59, 25, 42, and then 7. The game in which they won by 7, they held a double-digit lead for over half the game. They held at least a 10 to 14 point lead over Louisville for over half the game. And so they've been somewhat convincing victories, even though they haven't always been, wow, what a performance, right? I mean, Purdue was a great performance. Stanford was a great performance. I think Louisville was a very good performance because that's a really good football team. Miami of Ohio, not a great performance, but you did what you needed to do. You beat a team by 25 points. This is a chance, first and foremost, Trevor, to go out there and win your 5th straight game. That may not seem like that big of a deal, but for Marcus Freeman, I think it absolutely is a big deal because, number one, it would tie his longest winning streak of his career, which is 5 games that happened from October 22nd to November 19th in 2022, where Notre Dame won 5 games that season, beat UNLV, beat Syracuse, beat Clemson, beat Navy, and beat Boston College. What I would say about this 5-game stretch is I do think it's better competition, especially if you're able to beat Georgia Tech, because Georgia Tech's a good football team. Louisville's a good football team. Clemson was really good in 2022. Syracuse is really good, but those other teams were not good at all. And so it's a chance, number one, for Notre Dame to prove that, hey, listen, because this is what we still don't know, and we won't even know this weekend, but it's just another step is, can Marcus Freeman be the type of head coach that gets his team ready to play consistently? I mean, from year 1 of his tenure, from his 4th game, I mean, we saw it in his 4th and 5th game of his entire career. You start off really bad. You lose to Ohio State. You lose to Marshall. You struggle to beat Cal, and then you blast a 9-win North Carolina team that played for the ACC title that year and barely lost to Oregon. I mean, lost to Dan Lanning's Oregon team by a point in the bowl game.
Yeah,
you go out and then really convincingly beat a quality BYU team. It was an 8-point game, but it wasn't really that close. And you're thinking, okay, now they're going to live up to that preseason top 5 ranking. And then you go out and you lose to Stanford. And then you rebound with a blowout win over UNLV. You have a blowout win over Syracuse. You have a blowout win over Clemson. You're blowing Navy out at halftime, and then you let them back in the game, and you blow Boston College out, and you're thinking, okay, this team has arrived. All right, you went on the road and lost to a good USC team. Yeah, you were banged up. That was probably a better win. Got a great bowl win. 2023, now we're going to really see what Notre Dame is capable of. And they went out and they had a 4-game winning streak to start the season and won by 39, 53, 21, 24, and then you lose to Ohio State. You barely scrape by and beat Duke. You then get beaten, embarrassed by Louisville. And then you think they righted the ship, Trevor, blew out USC, blew out Pitt. They're playing a Clemson team that is struggling, had 8 starters out. Of course, Notre Dame is going to really start rolling now. And then they didn't. So we've seen stretches where Notre Dame has done what they've done over the last month. We've seen stretches where Notre Dame can play dominant football for a period of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then just that letdown game. This is an opportunity with a really good opponent to show that, hey, we're not that team anymore. We're a different team. We're a team that's going to be locked in and focused and really build on the momentum that you have over the last 3 weeks. We had Louisville, had a bye week, and then pounded Stanford. That's the first thing, Trevor. It's not even about the playoff and other stuff we're going to talk about. It's that right there. You have an opportunity to go out there and prove to yourself and prove to the nation that Notre Dame is not this up and down team that they've been the last 3 years. They have arrived as a team that just every week, you better bring it or you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
One thing that this week is going to tell me too, in addition to what you just said, is how well is Marcus Freeman going to have his team prepared to run and roll on Saturday, right? So we talked about Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman. They're 4-0 off of the bye week in Marcus Freeman's tenure, which is fantastic. There's that, that narrative that a lot of teams come out slow and sleepy through the bye week. The issue for Marcus Freeman has been the game after the game from the bye week. So you go back and you look at 2022, they have a bye week and then they beat a ranked BYU team the week after that when they only have 1 week to prepare. They drop a game to Stanford, a game that they should have won. In 2023, they had a bye week and they come out and they roll a Pitt team. And then the week after that, they lose to a Clemson team that was down 8 starters. And then they had a second bye week that year where after the bye, they come out and they roll a Wake Forest team. And then, yes, the final score does not really dictate at one point how close that Stanford game was. But I believe at one point Stanford had a 16-14 lead in that ball game. So
late in the second quarter.
Yep.
Like last few minutes, second quarter, Notre Dame put 2 touchdowns or 2 scores on the board late in that half to pull away. Yes.
And I think Notre Dame had 3 offensive turnovers in the first half against Stanford. I think it was 2 interceptions and 1 fumble or 1 interception, a Sam Hartman fumble, and then I think a fumble on special teams, something like that. So what all of that tells me is from the bye week, Marcus Freeman does a really good job of getting his team prepared and ready to roll that following Saturday. The week after that, when you have a smaller window to get your team prepared, that's when it becomes lackadaisical. That's when it becomes less focused and not as aggressive and not as fundamentally sound. So there's going to be a lot of things at Notre Dame that I'm going to be watching for on Saturday to make sure that some of that narrative gets put to rest. Now, some of it could be coincidence, but I think the numbers and the games and the stats kind of tell us otherwise. So I think that this is going to be big picture, a really good opportunity for Marcus Freeman to come back out and kind of put that narrative to rest and tie his longest winning streak at the helm at Notre Dame.
Good, because who you've been does not determine who you're going to be. It doesn't have to determine who you're going to be.
Right.
Right. And Marcus Freeman has one of these mantras, and he's got several. One of them is, hey, listen, challenge everything, right? Challenge everything. Well, look, the way you've done things in the past has led to you being a very inconsistent football team. It's led to you looking great one week and then not the next. It's led to you maybe overlooking some teams you shouldn't be overlooking. Right. And that's what I kind of think about with Georgia Tech is like, I hope you're not overlooking this football team because this is a good football team at 5-2. The good news is Notre Dame did get it. The players did watch that Louisville game. They did watch how Georgia Tech competed with Louisville. They know how scrappy Louisville was. So hopefully they won't. And that will be in an NFL stadium. So hopefully there's enough of those things to keep this team focused because this is not a Georgia Tech team. You're going to be able to show up and just roll the ball out and dominate because you're way more talented than them. Like you did Stanford and Purdue. This is not a Georgia Tech. This Georgia Tech team is not one that you can just go out on Saturday and just, all right, we're not going to play with a lot of fire, not going to play a lot of intensity. We're just going to kind of go through the motions, and we're just more talented like they did against Miami of Ohio. You're going to have to be at your best. And not only to beat them, but to beat them the way that you need to beat them, Trevor. And this kind of leads into my second point about what's at stake. So that's sort of the macro look at it, right? Like the big picture. What are they going to prove? There's also a really important aspect to this game in 2024. And I was talking with Bill Bender about this earlier today in the show we did at CFB Nation. So I co-hosted that today because Bill Trocchi's out of town. So I took care of that. We'll get that up here later today. But the conversation that we had and that you and I have had as well, I believe off the air, I've talked with so many different people about this team, but it's not just about winning anymore for Notre Dame. I mean, you've got to look good doing it, right? And I was making the point with him about Georgia. There was this assumption that Georgia was going to go, if they went 9-3, and let's say they lost to, Bama, Ole Miss, and Texas. They were going to be 9-3, blew out a lot of teams, beat Clemson, beat Tennessee, and they blew everybody out. But my point was, when you look at this Georgia team, they're ranked 5th because of preseason hype. They've not looked like a top 5 team. Yeah, they beat Clemson in week 1. Clemson played like crap that game. They barely beat Kentucky. They struggled to put Auburn away. They struggled with a really bad Mississippi State team. Only beat them by 10. Toledo had a more convincing win at Mississippi State than Georgia had against Mississippi State, I believe, at home. I believe that game was in Athens, correct? So you get to the point where you look and say, I don't know that Georgia's that dominant of a football team right now. And those are things that are going to start getting compared once the committee starts ranking. Now, the voters in the AP and the coaches poll, they're still hyping Georgia up because of the preseason, and that's fine. And because they won a title a few years ago, right? But like for how they've looked this season, they have not looked good. This is an opportunity for Notre Dame to go out there and get a convincing win just in general, which they did last week. And so while Georgia's struggling with Mississippi State, Notre Dame is wrecking Stanford. While Alabama's struggling with South Carolina, Notre Dame is wrecking Stanford. Well, now you get another opportunity, Trevor, to go out there and say, hey, listen, we're going to play a good 5-2 team, and we're going to handle our business. That's the objective. That's the goal. Doesn't mean it's going to happen because this is a good Georgia Tech team, as we've mentioned. But this game's going to be on ESPN. You're an 11-point favorite on the road, essentially. You've got to look like a top 10 team in this game. Here's the other part, Trevor. There are two teams that Notre Dame could potentially be in contention for a playoff spot or most likely seeding. So if Notre Dame goes 11-1, they're in the playoff, right? If they lose this weekend, then we'll stop talking about the playoff refer and until there's a reason to talk about it again. But if you keep winning, you're in. Then the debate now becomes, okay, where are you going to be seated? 5, 6, 7, 8 to be a home team, or are you going to be 9 or lower, and then you're playing on the road? Right now, a lot of the projections have them as a traveling that first weekend. I think the only one I've seen that has them hosting a game was Bud Elliott from, I don't know who he works for. He's one of those podcasts, I think maybe On 3. But he has Notre Dame as a 7 seed hosting Bama, which would be very interesting. But two of the teams that you may be in contention with are Miami and Georgia. Well, what do you have in common with those two teams? You all play Georgia Tech. And when you look at the schedule, the other interesting aspect of it is Georgia Tech plays Notre Dame essentially at home. They play in a neutral field. They play Miami at home and Georgia on the road. So when you're sitting there saying, okay, well, Notre Dame's got a comparable resume to Miami, who maybe went 11-2 or 12-1 and lost the ACC title game, or they're going against Georgia, who's maybe a 10-2 team, and you're looking at their schedule and you're saying, okay, well, we got to find some things to separate these teams. Well, Notre Dame played them on a neutral field and beat them with a last-second field goal. Miami and Georgia stomped them. Okay, that could be one of those factors. Or you look at it and say, okay, well, listen, Notre Dame pounded Georgia Tech. And then 2 weeks later, Georgia Tech went out and, 2 games later, 3 weeks later, Georgia Tech goes out there and gives Miami everything they can handle and took Georgia down to the wire. Okay, those things could then start to factor into it. So I hate to say it because it should just be about winning and losing and all those type of things. But it comes down to the point where style points could start being differences between, are you a 5 seed? Are you a 6 seed? Are you a 7 seed? Are you an 8 seed? And Notre Dame just going out there and smacking people week after week after week is going to be a big part of that. So you have a chance to beat a really good Georgia Tech team this weekend, hopefully beat a ranked Navy team the next weekend, and that's your last 2 games before that first top 25 college football playoff ranking comes out. That's the other thing that Notre Dame is playing for this weekend on top of that, Trevor. On top of building momentum and building themselves, that's the reality that they're in. Notre Dame can pretend that they're ignoring it, but they better not, because these things are going to factor into where you're viewed by the playoff committee.
Just one of those things that you don't want to leave up to interpretation, Brian, right? Because there will be – now, we follow the game and the schedule pretty closely, but at the end of the day, like a committee of voters will kind of look at Notre Dame's schedule, especially in comparison to what some of the other interconference schedules are. It's like, well, they played some good teams, but, then you have the Alabamas who have played Georgia and who played Tennessee and, LSU. So you just don't want to leave anything up to interpretation if you're Notre Dame, right? One of the reasons why people are very high on IU, who in the grand scheme of things has not played a tough schedule up to this point, is because they've decimated every single team that they've played. So if you're Notre Dame and thinking forward, some of it does come down to that eye test. You don't want to say, well, yeah, sure, they beat a 5-2 Georgia Tech team. It's like, yeah, they beat them by 30. They beat them by 20. Navy was ranked and they were looking really good, but questions around their strength of schedule. Agreed, Notre Dame beat them by 35. Like, you don't want to leave anything up to interpretation of. Now, look, ideally, does Notre Dame beat every opponent like that? I mean, yeah, but that might not be reality, unfortunately, right? But you just need to put yourself in a point where when a committee of voters is looking at Notre Dame's schedule, and if their strength of schedule is going to be a question, you have to prove on paper that they can go back and just look at that game and say, yeah, sure, they didn't play that strong of an opponent, but it was never that close. It was never in question if Notre Dame was going to win. It can't be one of those, 21-19 Ball State games from back in 2018 and, things like that. You have to start really increasing your margin of victory, keep putting together that offense, because Brian, to your point, that is the grand scheme of the impact on the season. Because if Notre Dame can go put away a Georgia Tech team that is essentially a home game, yes, it's not on Georgia Tech's campus field, but it's
which they chose, by the way.
Yep.
They chose to give that up. This is a home game for Georgia Tech. It's on a neutral field, but this is a home game for Georgia Tech.
Right.
Just want to make sure people understand that.
So you have the opportunity now that if a Georgia Tech team goes out and plays a Miami team really hard and, they find a way to beat Miami or find a way to knock off Georgia and Athens, you look at that game and then you go back and look, well, Notre Dame beat them by 2 scores on a neutral field. So that is what is at stake at this game, Brian. Can't emphasize that enough.
I mean, if you're a Notre Dame fan and we're doing all these, you ever see that meme of what's that guy's name? It's Charlie something. He was in Horrible Bosses and he was in that Philadelphia show with Charlie Day. Mm-hmm. That meme where he's like connecting all these crazy dots, and I don't know what that's from. Yeah. But that's like us talking about, who you're rooting for in each week to get Notre Dame in the college football playoff and a high seed and all this kind of stuff. But if you're looking at it, handle your business this weekend. Beat Georgia Tech the way you're supposed to. Now, to me, that doesn't necessarily mean 40-point win. That could be a 10-point win, a 14-point win, a 17-point win. At the end of the day, winning matters. Winning and win out and you're in the playoff, right? We're talking about this is about seeding. Seeding then could have a big say in who are you playing in round 1 or 2. Like somebody said today, well, without Benjamin Morrison, there's no way Notre Dame's going to win a playoff game. And, I said, well, I mean, who are they playing? Answer that question for me, because like you say, well, man, Benjamin Morrison. Yeah, well, 2 of the 4 teams you're going to play in the last 6 games without Benjamin Morrison are option teams. Okay, I mean, you can survive without Benjamin Morrison playing an option team, and he didn't even start. I don't think against Navy in 2022. Remember, they didn't even start him in that game. And then the team like Georgia Tech is going to be dangerous, and obviously, but then one of the other teams you're going to play is kind of terrible. So it's listen, you're still pretty good there. Now, can you make runs in the playoff? Well, that depends on who you're playing. The higher seed you get, probably the lower ranked team you're going to play, but then the higher chances you have of playing the ACC or Big 12 champ in the second round. That's why this stuff matters. So if you're a Notre Dame fan kind of following me on all this crazy drawing links and with stuff that matters, and the reason I bring this up about style points and all that other kind of stuff is because we've heard the committee talk about this before, Trevor. We've heard it talk about common opponents and look, this team struggled with that team and this other team handled them, and that's one of the things that kind of differentiated where we ranked a certain team, right? Well, you look at Notre Dame and you say, okay, what do you need to do? Notre Dame, handle your business this weekend. Well, then you want now you become a big Georgia Tech fan, because now Georgia Tech next week goes on the road and plays Virginia Tech. You want them to win that game and get their momentum back. Then they have a bye week, and then they play Miami at home, NC State at home, and at Georgia. If you can beat Miami, just doable, which they beat them last year in Miami. This is a better Miami team than it was last year, certainly, but it's a better Georgia Tech team than it was last year. And then just give Georgia a game. Like those are the things that can really help Notre Dame go from 7 seed to 6 seed or 5 seed, or those type of things. And it's not just this game; it's also other things. So, those are all parts of it. So, when you talk about what's at stake, Trevor, it's all of that stuff. But I also think the final piece is this is still a football team that is building its confidence. We started to see it take a jump against Louisville. It took a big jump against Stanford, but was Stanford the cementing that confidence point in your season? I don't know that it was. I think a game like this could be. You're going on the road. You're playing in an NFL stadium. You're playing a really quality football team. This could be the game that if you play the way that you're supposed to and to play the way you're capable of, could be that cementing moment for this Notre Dame team to say, hey, you know what? We are really good. And I know we lost this guy and we lost that guy and we lost that guy, and we hate that we don't have our brothers with us, but we're still really good. And we can handle business on both sides of the ball. I think that's the final piece for me, Trevor, is this is the kind of game that could serve as that cementing it in their heads that, hey, we're really good. And when we prepare a certain way, we're really hard to beat. So you know what? I like this feeling. Let's keep preparing this way. And that's how teams like that become juggernauts, because it finally gets in their head. Oh, so this is what we have to do to be dominant, not show up on Saturday, but put in that work and have that focus during the week. Yeah, we go out and handle business. Yeah, we are that kind of team. We are that good. Coach isn't just saying that because he has to. We are that good.
I think you said it perfectly from a preparation standpoint, right? Because there are times where it feels like Notre Dame is just kind of, I don't want to say throwing stuff against the wall and hope that it sticks, but it almost feels like from what we hear in press conferences and how the team shows up and what the product is on the field on Saturday, it almost feels like the preparation almost changes week to week. And it's like, all right, we think this is going to work. It worked against this team. I like this, but not necessarily this. This game from a preparation standpoint has a chance to really solidify, okay, every week, Monday through Friday, Sunday to Friday, whatever you want to say it, or even Sunday up until Saturday when they're doing the player walk, this is how we have to prepare at a championship level. And you start getting in that groove. I agree with you that the Stanford game, I don't think it cemented them as, this is where we're at now. But it's a huge step forward in where it was, because especially on the offensive side, it was the most complete, balanced game that we've seen from Notre Dame's offense so far this season. And if you can do it against a Georgia Tech defense, which I know we're going to dive into here in a little bit, it will start to get that ball rolling of like, okay, we can do this. This is something, these are the things that we need to continue to do on a week-to-week basis. And we're doing that the rest of the season. Not saying that if eventually something doesn't work or the style of opponent that you're playing, you do the same thing every week. But from a mental preparation standpoint, there are going to be things that they take away if they go out and convincingly beat a Georgia Tech team that Marcus Freeman and Denbrock and Golden can walk away from and say, okay, this is now a part of our weekly preparation. That was not really a constant. So I'm excited to see what that's going to look like for them on Saturday, because on paper, this is a team that Notre Dame should perform really well against, but Georgia Tech poses a lot of threats. So from a preparation standpoint, going to be really interesting to see what takeaways that we have and what we see on Saturday.
So, Trev, we're going to get into the offense next, but before we do, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. And the reason we ask you to do those things is not just because we want to, we feel great when we get X number of likes. It really does help the algorithm. It helps this show get spread. It helps people they see a show, hey, this is a well-liked show. People hit the like, people share it, people do all those type of things. And all of a sudden they start promoting it to more and more people who look for Notre Dame content. So that's one of those ways. It's a free thing that takes you 5 seconds to do, and it helps us. And, that's much appreciated, folks. And of course, people ask all the time, how can I best support you? And as we found out with our guy, Larry Wise, and his family that hooked him up with his membership, Larry Wind, the membership that his family hooked him up with, that's always the best way to support Irish Breakdown, is that way. So we appreciate that very, very much. So check that out. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Also a reminder, I got an email from someone yesterday that says, hey, I keep going to my saved, I've got your bookmarked. I got your page bookmarked, and they keep sending me to this old Athlon page. Some people it's still going to the old SI page. And then I'm just like, look, always type in your bookmark www.irishbreakdown.com, because no matter where we go, whether Athlon gives us a new page, whether we go independent, whether we're with SI, no matter who we're with, irishbreakdown.com always links you back to that homepage, wherever it is, irishbreakdown.com. So that's what you should have in your bookmark if you want to have that as well. So when you talk about getting our content, supporting our content, those are all the best ways to do that, and we appreciate all of it. So, Trevor, this matchup between the Notre Dame offense and Georgia Tech is a very fascinating one because this is a much improved Georgia Tech defense. It's not an elite Georgia Tech defense by any stretch. It's a good Georgia Tech defense, but it's a pesky Georgia Tech defense. You talk about the job that this coaching staff has done. You got to give them a lot of credit, because when you look at where Georgia Tech was defensively, let's go over some of the bigger categories, right? Of scoring defense and things like that. Last year, Georgia Tech's defense ranked 97th in the country in scoring defense at 29.5 points per game. Last year, they ranked 123rd, giving up 437 points or yards per game. They ranked 117th at 6.3 yards allowed per play. Their rush defense ranked 131st in the country last season. And then their pass defense was better simply because they were so bad at running. But they ranked 53rd in pass defense last season, but they ranked 88th in yards allowed per attempt. Because again, 75th in quarterback rating, the 53rd was due because people ran on them so much. They were a much different team. And then you fast forward this season, Trevor, and right now they rank 48th in points per game against a very quality schedule so far. They ranked 36th in the country in total defense, 24th in rushing defense, 44th in yards allowed per rush. They went from last year on defense, Trevor, they gave up, it was really a bad number, 5.4 yards per carry last season. This year, they've dropped that down to 3.6 already. Their pass defense still is an issue. They rank between 83rd and 104th in all those, so that hasn't been a strength of theirs. They're 28th in third down defense this season, and they're 59th in red zone defense. So you're going up against a Notre Dame offense that I don't know, like the Stanford game was great, but is it a one-off? Like you played a great first quarter against Louisville and a good finish against Louisville, but in between, not a lot of good stuff in there. You know what I mean? Stanford was great. Your first team dominated the whole game. Your backups came in, would have scored twice if they had another minute and a half left on the clock, like they did against Purdue, and you rolled. Is that just, hey, we had a good game out of the break, or is that going to become the new norm, Trevor? That's going to really be the key, because this is you talk about what Notre Dame has to prove as a team. You talk about all the injuries on defense and all that type of stuff. The best thing that you can do as a football team to help overcome the loss of Benjamin Morrison and Boubacar Traore and Jordan Patelho and Jason Onye and guys like that, score a lot of points on offense, and don't let that defense be in those situations where they have to now make these big fourth quarter stops, right? Let them pin their ears back and go. So, hey, they've carried you for several seasons. Now it's time for you for a little bit to carry them and help them out. And the offense is going to be the key. And this is going to be a great test, because this is a Georgia Tech team that is not super talented, but they have good talent, not great talent, but they're well coached, they're aggressive, and they play hard. And that it reminds me a lot of the Northern Illinois game. Not a lot of great talent, but some veteran players that know how to play. They're well coached and they play hard. And here's the deal: they're not going to be afraid of you. They're not. So this is a great, great test for the Notre Dame offense. We're going to learn a lot about this Notre Dame offense on Saturday, Trevor.
Comes down to playing complementary football and the offense putting the defense, to your point, in a position where they don't have to make a stop and go 3 and out on every single drive. Right? Argument could be made that the last 2 games, Notre Dame's offense helped pick up Notre Dame's defense, which is a very refreshing thing. But I agree with you. Georgia Tech is not a defense from an athletic standpoint that's going to come in and just overwhelm you from that aspect. But what they do really well is they fly to the football. They're very aggressive coming downhill, and they play really hard, man. It's almost kind of like that chip on their shoulder where they know that they're not the most athletic defense in the world. So what they make up for it with their lack of athleticism is they make up for it by playing really, really hard.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Well, like they've got that middle linebacker, Kyle Efford, right? And he's an old school throwback linebacker. He's 6'2", 230. He's a pure box player. But he's got the neck roll, and he's smart, and he's instinctive, and he makes great reads, and he flies downhill, and he smacks you in the mouth.
Yeah.
You know, they got a kid on the D tackle, kid named Jordan Vanderberg. Not a great athlete, but his motor is nuts. He plays hard. Romello Height's a pretty decent athlete off the edge. He's a kid that transferred in from USC. Kevin Harris, again, not an elite athlete, just a really good try-hard guy. Zeke Biggers is a talented kid, but he's been kind of disappointing to me this season. He's 6'6", 320, all the talent in the world. He hasn't produced yet. You need to make sure this isn't the game where the light goes on and he makes his NFL bones, you know what I mean, so to speak, by having that big game against Notre Dame. So it's a very intriguing team because I don't look at their team. I mean, their secondary's got some good athletes, but I'm not blown away by what I see on, from them in the secondary either. But man, they play hard. And Tyler Santucci, Notre Dame fans should remember him. He was at Notre Dame in 2017. This is the first year, I believe, since then that he hasn't been with Mike Elko. He was with Mike Elko at Wake Forest as well. He's definitely a Mike Elko disciple in how he attacks with that 4-2-5 look. Mixing up the looks up front. There'll be in some odd looks on some snaps. There'll be in some over-under looks on other snaps. Mix up their coverage. They'll show too high, roll to something different. They do a lot of combo coverages, 2 to the boundary, 4 to the field. They'll start looking like they're showing that same look. They'll roll to 3. They'll bring their safeties down. They'll blitz their linebackers. They'll blitz their – I'm watching the play against North Carolina where, quarterback drops back and he's looking left and the left tackle's like, I don't know who to block. I got an end crashing my face this way. I got a linebacker crashing this way, and then the safety's coming through that gap behind him. It's like, I don't know who to block right now. And you'll see that they'll call us 5-6 plays a game minimum against their opponents of that type of thing, where somebody just comes running through the line untouched because they don't quite know how to handle the twist and stunt. And Tyler Santucci's done a really nice job with that when I look at what they're doing defensively. And it's why a team that doesn't have, again, I don't want to make it seem like they got a bunch of stiffs out there. They don't. But they're not a team to me that's necessarily got way more talented this offseason with the portal kids and things like that. They got better coached. That's the big difference with this Georgia Tech team this year. They're much better coached, and they've bought in. They've bought into whatever Brent Key is selling and whatever Tyler Santucci's selling because they play hard. They're relentless. And even against Georgia Tech, when they fell, or against Louisville, when they fell behind, they just kept battling, and shut that Louisville run game down. I mean, they really did. And that's probably the area where I've seen the biggest growth from them, Trevor, is they have become a legitimately stingy run defense this season. And the Notre Dame offensive line is going to be tested because they're very big up front on their defense, but they play very, very hard. And this past weekend, they did give up a lot of yards to North Carolina, but North Carolina is a really good rushing team. And, they had a couple missed tackles here and there, but this is a North Carolina team that's, that on the season right now is averaging 198 yards per game. And for Georgia Tech and what they've done so far, Trevor, that was a bit of an anomaly. The most yards they'd allowed all season was 150. Syracuse only got 134. 4 of their first 6 opponents went for under 100 yards rushing. That includes Duke, and that also includes Louisville. They held Louisville to 57 rushing yards in that game, Trevor. And we saw that Louisville's got a quality ground attack and certainly ran the ball effectively on Notre Dame. And they shut it down. I mean, they flat out shut it down. I mean, you look at Duke, Trevor, they were coming off of a 185-yard performance against North Carolina, went for 74 against Georgia Tech. So for the second week in a row, you're facing a team that's got a really stingy run defense and a secondary that maybe you can take advantage of. Notre Dame's going to have to find a way to do that.
They're significantly more well-coached. They're a lot more technically sound football team on the defensive side for sure. Notre Dame, again, is going to have to find, I don't want to say creative ways, but it can't be one of those games where, again, you just sit there and consistently run into the teeth of the defense, right? This is a very, very, very stout defensive front for Georgia Tech. From a run game standpoint, they play aggressive, they play hard, and the offensive line is going to be put to test again, like you said. So going to be really interesting to see how the offensive line handles that again in back-to-back weeks, and arguably back-to-back weeks when you factor in the Louisville defensive front. So, yeah, I mean, Georgia Tech, they find ways to be disruptive in the backfield. They, like I said, they come downhill. They play really well in the box. So Now, on the flip side, the argument could be made that they haven't seen a backfield as talented as what Notre Dame's is, right?
Except maybe last weekend against North Carolina and Antonio Hampton, who went for over 200 on them.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Because they don't have the depth there, but he's really good.
Yeah, he is.
He's really good.
He is. So going to be interested to see how Notre Dame's offensive line handles that, because this is a very much stop the run first type of defense, which I think is why they are vulnerable so much in the pass game, because they will leave their corners kind of isolated a little bit to take away the run. So going to be interested to see what Denbrock does, the game plan around that, and how the offensive line plays.
And because they do so much movement in the second end, they're prone to blowing some coverages as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's factored into that mix a lot as well, because you are in year one in that defense.
Sure.
And there's still some learning processes going. And I think they've gotten a little bit better with their pass defense as well, Trevor. I mean, they gave up a bunch of yards to Syracuse, and then Louisville had a lot of success beating them down the field. That's a really good Louisville receiving core. I don't know that we consider and say that Notre Dame's got a receiving core that can match what Louisville has. They haven't shown it this year anyway. So can Notre Dame do that? But Duke didn't throw the ball very effectively on them, 6.6 yards per attempt. North Carolina went for 6.4. Malik Murphy's a pretty talented kid, but still raw. And then, of course, North Carolina is playing with their backup quarterback. VMI went for 4.8. Georgia State went for 6.2. Florida State went for 7.1. And it wasn't until that last late drive with DJ Uiagalelei making a couple big throws, they were doing nothing in the pass game up until that point in time. So they've been very up and down. But the other thing, too, is they held VMI to 92 yards. And they still rank where they rank in the pass defense. So there's certainly areas where and the other thing, too, is they've given up 11 passing touchdowns this season and only picked off one pass. That was against Duke. You got to make sure that continues, because they're not a super disruptive secondary when it comes to, to getting their hands on the football a ton. But they've got 23 pass breakups on the season, Trevor, which is it's an okay number. It ranks them 35th in the country. Only one interception. So overall, they're not a super disruptive pass defense, and you've got to make sure that continues. And you're going to have to make sure you protect the football this weekend against them. But there's going to be some opportunities. But really, what this comes down to for me, Trevor, is first and foremost, this is going to be a huge game for the Notre Dame offensive line. Huge game for the Notre Dame offensive line because of what we talked about. This is a defensive line that's got good size. Give you guys their depth chart, anticipated depth chart. Their starting ends, they're one of those oars. Josh Robinson is 6'6", 265. Sylvan Yunquin, I'm just guessing on how his name is pronounced, 6'4", 260. On the other side, their rush ends are 240 and 245, Romello Height and Kevin Harris. And then up the middle, Zeke Biggers, their nose is 6'6", 320. His backup is 6'6", 315. They're starting three techniques. They have, an oar, and both of these kids play a lot. Makia Scott, 6'4", 290, and he's a pretty stout kid when you see him on film. And then Jordan Vanderberg is a 6'3", 305-pound fire hydrant. I mean, so they've got good size, and like we said before, most of those guys play with great motors, and get after it. So this is going to be a big, big battle for the Notre Dame offensive line. They're going to have their hands full with this Georgia Tech defense, and then they're going to have to deal with the linebackers crashing downhill because, again, we've seen this defensive system before, and against Texas A&M, Notre Dame was able to rip off some big plays, but they were very inefficient. That's going to be a big key in this game as well, is can you be more efficient when you're running the football against them? They weren't super efficient against Stanford either. If you go study the numbers, Notre Dame's starting offense only rushed for 115 yards in that game. A lot of their yards came in the second and the fourth quarter with the backups, where Aeneas and Kedron and those guys kind of going off a little bit on them. Now, they averaged over 5 yards a carry because they didn't run a lot. They were 23 carries for 115 yards is what I had them at numbers-wise. But they were just over 50% efficiency. It's not great, and you need to be a little bit better in that regard this week against this defense. Because if you can gash them a little bit and have some early down wins with your run game, it gets them in a lot of trouble. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But this is a quality front seven, Trevor, and the Notre Dame offensive line is going to be tested. They're going to be tested in a big way. Yeah, absolutely. And kind of branching off from that, in addition, specifically talking around the run game, because their defensive line
does a really good job of just relentlessly pursuing the football, to your point, with them having just almost feels like the Energizer Bunny with how relentless their motor is, right? I think the tight ends from a blocking standpoint are also going to hold a big key to Notre Dame's success in the run game, because similar to Texas A&M, when the tight ends performed well in their run fits, the offense was able to run the ball quite effectively. On Jeremiah Love's go-ahead touchdown at the end, Cooper Flanagan had a really good down block in the hole where Jeremiah Love sprung free. And on the plays where there were some missed blocking assignments from the tight end room, running game struggled a little bit. So with the size and how relentless their defensive line gets after the football, I think all encompassing, they're going to have to do a really good job up front for sure.
Now we talk about the secondary. We talked a lot about it. The question, however, Trevor, with everything we said, a lot of different coverage. When you roll a lot and you show a lot out of defense, especially in your first year, you can be prone to giving up big plays. Mm-hmm. I think you had the stats, Trevor. You want to read those off, the stats about their defense and the big plays.
Yeah.
Read that off. Now, keeping in mind the context is they have played one more game than a lot of teams, but that doesn't change this a whole lot. You don't go that low just because you have one more game played. But read those stats for the big plays.
So Georgia Tech ranks 107th in the country in passing plays of 20 yards or longer. They've given up 23 on the season. They rank 93rd in the country in 30-yard pass plays. They've given up 10, and they rank 89th in the country in 40 yards or more passing plays allowed. They've given up 5. So
now here's the rub. Notre Dame ranks 122nd in most passing plays of 20 yards or more. They rank 100th in most passing plays of 30 yards or more and 108th in passing plays of 40 yards or more. So Georgia Tech is going to come into this game and say, all right, we're not going to let you run the ball on us. And I think Georgia Tech is better equipped physically to stop to shut Notre Dame's run game down if they want to commit enough resources to it. I don't think Stanford schemed well. They had some try-hard guys, but once Notre Dame, and we said this in the keys to it, if Notre Dame gets outside and they have no chance, and they had to cut back where he cut it back and bounce it outside and outran the defense. You had Jeremiah Love bouncing his outside zone for a big play. They ran some perimeter screens to attack, what was not a very athletic Stanford defense. I think Georgia Tech is better suited up front to do damage on the Notre Dame run game, where they can basically force Notre Dame to throw the football in this game. And so, number one, the offensive line is going to have to counter that with a good performance. But can the Notre Dame wide receiver core step up and make plays? Now, look, they had good success last week. Stanford, I don't think, is as good in the secondary as Georgia Tech, talent-wise. Neither of them are really that good, but Georgia Tech, to me, gives me more problems than what Stanford does. They also can create more misses by some of the different coverage things that they do and bringing safeties down, and they can create hits on the quarterback and things like that. So they're not a team that's been great at getting after the quarterback. I think that hurts them a little bit. And that's partly, they're very good run defenders, but they're not great pass rushers. If you look at it and you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers, well, first of all, if you look at sacks, because I know people like to look at sacks, Georgia Tech this season ranks they rank 104th in sacks. That's 9, but they've played more games. They're 113th in sacks per game. And when you look at and compare their numbers, for example, Trevor, according to Pro Football Focus, they have 72 pressures on the season, and they have 21 hits on the quarterback, either sacks plus hits in 7 games. Notre Dame, on the other hand, has 105 pressures in 1 fewer game. They've played 6. Georgia Tech has played 7. And they have 43 hits on the quarterback. 21 hits, 21 sacks, 22 hits is what they have. So those are things you look at, Trevor, and you say, okay, they're not great at getting pressure on their quarterback. They're not great in the secondary, but is Notre Dame good enough to make them pay for that? With the issues they have, if I'm Georgia Tech, I'm getting Romello Harris and Romello Height and Kevin Harris matched up against Anthony Knapp all game long. I'm going to do some stuff out of my odd man fronts where I'm going to put one of those big D tackles on Anthony Knapp and power rush him right into the back of the quarterback. There's a lot of things where I'm going to go at the left side of the line, and it's naturally what Tyler Santucci already does. That concerns me. So can the line hold up? And even if it does, are these receivers here, are they good enough to exploit what has been a not very good secondary? They did it to a degree against Stanford, but let's be honest, they didn't light the world on fire throwing the football. Riley Leonard was on pace for about 300 yards. That's a pretty darn good day's performance. Can that be replicated, or was it a one-off? That's what we're going to find out. That's what we don't know, and that's going to be a huge part of this matchup, Trevor, is you're not good where they're not good. So which one carries the day? Big week for Riley Leonard and the pass catchers.
Yeah, this week, Mike Denbrock's going to have to do a really good job of scheming his players into space. Georgia Tech's defense has shown, once again, kind of like what we've harped on. And I don't want to make it sound like they're just a bunch of nobodies out there in defense that aren't athletic, but I am willing to err on the side that Notre Dame's wide receiving core has better athletes than what than what Georgia Tech has as their linebacking core. They're guys that are very comfortable playing in the box. Louisville, and yes, I know that Notre Dame doesn't have a wide receiver on their team that replicates Ja'Cory Brooks, right? But Notre Dame needs to do a really good job this week of getting their playmakers into space, not necessarily just taking shot after shot downfield. I mean, Chris Bell ate up Georgia Tech on 2 crossing routes that were no more than 6 yards past the line of scrimmage. And one play went, I think, for like 50 and the other one went for 40, right? So it's plays like that when I mean getting your guys into space. This isn't a game where Riley Leonard has to drop back and throw 17 bombs against this defense, right? So
it's needed. You want a couple,
100%.
Because Shuck hit a couple bombs over top as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you are correct. It was
100%.
getting in space.
Because on paper, and this goes beyond the Louisville game, Georgia Tech's defenders give up big plays in one-on-one matchups, like from a high point the ball ability and things like that. So you will have to take some shots to keep the defense honest, just to make sure that they're not creeping up and every single player on their defense is playing within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. Keep them honest, but do a good job of scheming your guys open into space. So hopefully a lot of motion, things like that.
This is also going to be a very interesting week in regard to how Mike Denbrock uses his personnel and how he formulates some opportunities to get his top playmakers in certain matchups. I'll just leave it at that. I'm very curious to see how that goes. So that's a little bit about the Georgia Tech defense, Trevor. It is a very interesting group because you look at some of their numbers and you're like, that's just not good. Their pass pressure numbers are not good at all. Their pass defense is not good, but they've had some very good moments. Their run defense has been very good most of the year, coming off of a not very good performance against a big time back.
Sure.
By the way, but can Notre Dame? It really comes down to, is Notre Dame going to play like the team they should be, or the team that they've been for most of the season? That's really what it's going to come down to. If Notre Dame plays like the team they should be, then they should be able to score well over 30 points in this game. If they're not, then this could end up being a dogfight where it's who can make the biggest stop in the fourth quarter to win the game. I mean, that's what it comes down. I mean, it's simplified, but I really look at this particular part of this matchup as being Mike Denbrock and his staff's ability to find the holes in the Georgia Tech defense, put their players in position to be successful, and then hopefully Joe Rudolph can get his line ready to play. Because to me, that's the great that could be the great equalizer in this game, where Notre Dame has the perimeter advantage, they have the overall talent advantage, but there's enough there where we've seen some of those inconsistencies in the line to say, well, you should have whooped that team, but you couldn't get anything going up front. And if that can't be the case Saturday against Georgia Tech, it just can't.
Yeah, 100%. Georgia Tech is a team that plays above what their rankings are on paper. I mean, that's a style of defense that they have. I take out Florida State's record. You're not going to convince me that on defense, Georgia Tech has better athletes than what Florida State had on offense. You're just not, right? So, but it's a testament to, one, the lackluster performance from Florida State. And I say that very lightly, but it also is a testament to how well Georgia Tech plays on defense as a cohesive unit. Because obviously on paper, Notre Dame has the speed advantage. They have the athletic advantage, but this Georgia Tech defense, man, they're stingy. They play really aggressive. So I'm going to be really interested to see, to your point, what Mike Denbrock does from a personnel standpoint, from a schematic standpoint, to get their offense going again from a different defense than what Stanford presented. So it's going to be interesting. It's a really intriguing matchup for sure.
What was the thing we said after the football game against Florida State and Georgia Tech? It was Georgia Tech beat Florida State up in the trenches.
Yeah.
Whooped their butt in the trenches. Notre Dame's got to make sure that doesn't happen. That's what it comes down to. Clemson did it, or Louisville did a great job. And I remember you breaking down that tight end screen that they ran. You know, they did a great job in that game of getting their pass catchers into matchups that were favorable to them, calling some plays. They did some max pro to allow for the deep shots, and they got their guys in space, and that had a big role in the outcome of that game, Trevor. And that's something Notre Dame is going to have to be able to figure out if they can do. And if they can, then I like where this team is at. And if they can't, then, you know, this game could get a little bit interesting. I'm actually trying to look. I'm going to go back and see something here real quick because to back up your numbers about the Georgia Tech Louisville game, I want to find this real quick. Give me 1 second. I'm going to look up Louisville's pass chart against Georgia Tech because I thought that was very fascinating when I looked at it. So obviously Georgia Tech Louisville hit 2 bombs, to your point. They hit a 42-yard shot. That was that one ball to Ja'Cory Brooks, and then another 57-yard play. That was the pass to the right to Ja'Cory Brooks. And then in the intermediate 10 to 29, they had 3 completions for 39 yards. On the underneath stuff, 0 to 9 yards, they went 7 for 7 for 129 yards, to your point. So, I mean, think about that, right? That's a lot of damage after the catch. To have 129 yards on 7 completions on balls that were thrown 0 to 9 yards past the line of scrimmage, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of that after the catch stuff. So that was that nice blend that Louisville had of the deep shots with getting their guys the ball in space and letting them go to work. And Notre Dame's going to have to be able to figure out a way to do that if they're going to have a shot in this game. Or not, I shouldn't say a shot. If they're going to thrive the way that they should on offense in this game.
Sure. I mean, going back to your point about the Florida State-Georgia Tech game, Marcus Freeman has preached since he's gotten here that this is going to be a line-driven program, and now it's the opportunity to go out and show that that's the case because Georgia Tech has shown that they can eat you up on the offensive and the defensive line. So both lines have to come to play.
And this is game 4 of this new look line.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like, you know, it really 4.5 if you think about it, because they had all of Miami, all of Louisville, all of Stanford, and then half of the Purdue game because Strouth and Ashton Craig both got knocked out of that game. So now this will be game 4, full game of this group together, plus a bye. They had the whole bye week to work together as a group too. So there's no more, well, you're missing some guys. Okay, you're 5 weeks, basically 5 weeks into this new look offensive line.
Yeah.
They need to know how to do their job. And they showed improvement in pass pro, not just handling their job, but as I broke down in the show on Sunday night, they did a better job technically, you know, not turning their shoulders as much and doing things to pick those things up. And that's got to continue now against Georgia Tech. So did you want to add something else before we move on to the defense, Trevor? It looked like you kind of had that. I got something else I want to say.
No, I mean, it was just more in agreement with you. I'm more willing to err on the side of give them some time to figuring out lineups on the defensive side of the ball because Rubio's back, Burnham's back. They've only really had 1 game under their belt this season. Burnham's had a couple more, but he was hurt for the bulk of it. But again, to your point, at some point, on the offensive line, they're going into their 4th start together. All of the, I guess you could say, quote unquote, excuses that the offensive line can have are starting to go away. Yes, Anthony Knapp is a true freshman, but he's going into his 7th game as a starter, right? So it's not enough anymore. Well, they've been switching lineups and Knapp is a true freshman. It's like, all right, at some point, you kind of have to start saying, this is the offensive line. It's time for them to roll. So.
Right. We're going to move to defense next, folks. Before we do, real quick, takes you 3 seconds. See that little thumbs up sign below here? Go ahead and hit that. Give us a like. You'll see a little thing, a couple spots to the right of it. It says share. Go ahead and share that with your friends and family. Share that, obviously, digitally, also with people, and help spread the word about what Irish Breakdown is doing on our shows. And Trevor, this last one is going to be fun. This is the good-on-good matchup that we talked about, right? And it's the Notre Dame defense against the Georgia Tech matchup, the offense. And I'm very much looking forward to this because I'll be honest with you. I feel like I know a lot of coaches and I know a lot about teams, and I feel like I have a pretty good read on certain things. And when I was watching that Georgia Tech Florida State game, I'm sitting there saying to myself, I have no idea who their offensive coordinator is. I have never heard of this Buster Faulkner guy a day in my life. But I'm like, but he is doing work on that Florida State defensive staff with the things he was doing. He was a quarterback's coach, quality control guy at Georgia up until 2023. He was at Southern Miss for a year, Arkansas State, and Middleton. I've never heard of this guy before. I'm going to be honest with you. And he does some really interesting things and some really good stuff that honestly, he's got some talent to work with. That helps. But he's done a really good job of getting the most out of his players. And this is an offense that is dangerous, not just because they're kind of mediocre players that are schemed well. There's talented players at the skill positions that are also schemed well. And that makes this Georgia Tech offense very dangerous. I mean, and in a lot of ways against Louisville, they kind of hurt themselves against Louisville offensively with, Haynes King having that real bad throwing it backwards and those type of things. But overall, they've done a great job with him of minimizing the turnovers as well. This is a kid that last year, Trevor, threw 16 interceptions. They've, as a team, and he is as one, has only thrown one interception all season. Now, the turnover against Louisville that counted as a fumble because he threw it backwards, and he's lost a couple fumbles. But overall, he's done a much better job of protecting the quarterback, which partly kudos go to him. But the other part of it is great job on this coaching staff of he actually, I feel like he throws it more this year. The numbers don't necessarily back that up, but I feel like part of it is because they're in games more, where last year they would throw a lot in the second half because they were down big. This year it's more about just they come out and they're more balanced early, and he's just more effective. And he's seen such an improvement. I mean, last year he was at 7.7 yards per attempt. This year he's at 8.2. Last year he completed 61.6% of his passes. This year he's at 71.2. Last year's quarterback rating was 142.19. This year it's 152.93. And he's still a threat to run the football. He's got 14 touchdowns in 7 games, 8 passing touchdowns, 6 rushing touchdowns for Haynes King. And he's had a really solid year. Now, last couple games, he hasn't been as good as a thrower, but he's had some really good games so far this season. And, like I said at the very beginning, we don't know the injury status of where he is, Haynes King. They haven't announced that. And so we're going to talk about it like he's going to play. But if he can't play, the system doesn't change. And that's what I like about this team. They've got preseason first-team Indy opponent running back for me, Jamal Haynes. Their receiving core is a lot better than it was last year, and then Haynes King is a lot better player. So this is a very dangerous offense that is going to put a very beat up Notre Dame defense to the test. And we'll talk about that part first, Trevor, and then I'm going to get into some of my other thoughts about the Notre Dame defense. This is a very well coached and a talented Georgia Tech offense. You're muted.
Gotcha. Sorry. No, I didn't know if we were transitioning into the defense yet or not.
No, we were. We are.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we're talking about the Georgia Tech offense matchup against the Notre Dame defense. So, yeah, that's what we're kind of going into. So, looking at this offense, Trevor, some things that give me pause, concern, is what they do naturally. They do a lot of stuff that Notre Dame has struggled with this year.
Yeah.
A lot of motion. A lot of jet stuff. They do jet motion more than any team that Notre Dame is going to play this year. And because I don't count what Army and Navy do with that orbit motion and stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the jet. They shift, they motion, they do jets, they run jet sweeps, they do perimeter screens. A lot of that stuff, a lot of that pre-snap, getting the defense kind of on its heels stuff that Notre Dame has had a lot of problems with. They do a lot of that stuff naturally, and they have the playmakers to make it scary for Notre Dame. And that right there, Trevor, is my biggest concern for this game. Is Notre Dame is already a young defense, and they're going to be younger now that Benjamin Morrison's out. You're going from a junior All-American corner to a freshman corner, who, talented as he may be, he's still not Benjamin Morrison.
Right.
And you said it to me before the show, they're going to go after him, but they're not just going to go after him the way that Louisville did, just attacking him down the field. They'll do that, but they're going to go after him and the other young players, Drake Bowen, Kingston, Jaden Alsbury, Adon Schuler, with a lot of stuff that's only a couple teams have done. Louisville's done it. Northern Illinois has done it, and I don't know why more teams aren't doing it, is using a lot of that motions and shifts to try to get Notre Dame to be moving and communicating as you're snapping the ball. Some teams needed to add it to their repertoire. Georgia Tech already has it. It's who they are. And that's the biggest concern I have when it comes to potentially making some big plays against this Notre Dame defense and then being able to get the run game going. Is that right there? Is the ability of this offense to create some big plays against the Notre Dame defense that has had some issues. Georgia Tech is 8th in the country this year in gains of 20 yards or more this season. And, you know, they're 12th in gains of 30 yards or more. And what has Notre Dame been vulnerable to this year, Trevor? Unlike last year, giving up big plays.
Yep.
So that's the biggest concern I have when I look at this matchup, Trevor.
Yeah, this is an explosive Georgia Tech offense, right? I mean, we just alluded to it. They have 4 receivers that all average over 12 yards a catch. That's headed by Malik Rutherford and Eric Singleton. And both of those guys, it's interesting because almost opposite of receivers like Ja'Cory Brooks and Chris Bell and guys like that, they're not big guys. I think Malik Rutherford is 5'9", Eric Singleton is 5'11", but those are 2 guys that can take the top off of defenses, right? Which, to your point, they're going to go after Leonard Moore, and they're going to go after Leonard Moore early. Now, based on the performance that Leonard Moore had against Louisville, I am more confident. I'm glad that we got to see Leonard Moore against Louisville, opposed to this just him being his first start. But this is a Georgia Tech offense that can hurt you, man, because on top of those wide receivers that they have, similar to Notre Dame, they have a 3-headed monster in the backfield. They have Haynes King, who averages 5.7 yards a carry. They have Jamal Haynes, who averages 5.6, and then their other wide receiver, or their other running back, Alexander, he also averages 5.6 yards a carry. That trio has combined for 1,091 rushing yards and 14 rushing touchdowns. So this is probably the most balanced offense that Notre Dame will be taking on up to this point and potentially all season. So going to be interested to see how they fare with some of the injuries that they've had stacked up.
I think you're right. I actually think it will be the most balanced team that they will play all. They have played all year and will play all year, assuming that their quarterback is healthy. Because, you know, when you look at it, you've got a team that can run the ball in traditional runs. You have a team that can run the ball with their quarterback. A team that can make plays when things break down with their quarterback on scrambles. And they have a guy that is much improved as a passer this year. I mean, again, 7 games in, he's completing over set. When you're 7 games in, Trevor, and you're completing over 70% of your passes, that's not a fluke.
Nope.
You know, you're not in a situation where you've got that. Well, you had that one game early where, you know, you completed a lot of passes, and you know, no, it's been 68.8 against Florida State, 82.8 against Georgia State, 74.4 against Syracuse, 77.3 against VMI, 65.6 against Louisville, 74.2 against Duke, and then the 50% against North Carolina that's the outlier. That's the fluky game so far,
right?
And the game they got banged up in. So it's one of those things where they can put you to the test. And then the other part too is, and this is a question that Stephen Imholt asked in the chat, Trevor. It's not just that they're doing motion. Motion in and of itself isn't a problem. If all you're doing is motioning all day and running inside zone every play, and there's no other action to it, you figure it out pretty quickly, which is something we've complained about with Notre Dame's offenses. By the middle of the first quarter or second quarter, teams have kind of figured out, okay, when the tight end motions like this is where the ball's going. Right. And that's something Notre Dame's got to improve on as a defense. But when I look at this matchup, Trevor, they do some of the stuff that Stanford does in a completely different way. But some of the challenges that Stanford, I guess is a better way of saying it, because if they did the things Stanford did, then it would be a similar way. They present similar challenges to what Stanford did because they do so much with their backfield action. They will run, just hand the ball off. They will run read zone concepts. They will pull out of the read zone and run bootlegs. They will do read zones with the under screen that Notre Dame runs. They will run run action and then half roll play action and throw the ball down the field. The quarterback does not sit behind the center all game as a runner and then also as a passer. They'll do a little sprint out. But I love how they move the pocket. Because they're not a great pass protecting offensive line. They're not. They're not just 5 guys are going to line up and shut you down. But what they do is you don't know where the quarterback is always going to be. And if you get caught in a situation where you're slanting one way and they're rolling the pocket the other way, Haynes King will just turn that sucker in and just keep going. You know what I mean? For a big play. They really do present a lot of those unique challenges, along with having a group of skill players that can hurt you. Running back that can hurt you, a quarterback that can hurt you, multiple receivers that can hurt you. That's the challenge that they present themselves. That they present to the defense, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the keys to victory that you had for last week for Notre Dame's offense, funny enough, is you said that Notre Dame needs to do things creative in the run game, like do similar things out of formations, like pass out of similar run concept formations that they have and do things like that, right? And Georgia Tech is a team that does that really well. They can disguise what they do in the backfield very well because they showed it against Louisville. In the first quarter, Georgia Tech's offense was moving the ball up and down the field on Louisville's defense. They were. Go back and watch the game, right? So they do a really good job of disguising certain pass protections. They'll roll the pocket, whether it be on a zone read or to get Haynes King around outside of the pocket. So going to be interested to see what they do to game plan against Notre Dame's defense. And like we've been talking about, the loss to Ben Morrison is going to be interesting to see how Al Golden schemes that, because typically it was, we all know what Al Golden's philosophy is around stopping the run. And it's a concern, but not a top of mind priority. And you want them to play into basically the teeth of your defense, which is the passing game. And up to this point, it has been. Well, now you're kind of asking your defense in a guy in Christian Gray, who it's his second game back after being injured. And it didn't look like he was too banged up, but a little rusty against Stanford. And now a true freshman in Leonard Moore. So it's going to be interesting to see what adjustments Al Golden makes, because this is a team that can hurt you on the ground.
Yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah. And not just with scheme, but also talent. They have 100%. A talented running back and a talented quarterback. The other thing too, Trevor, is, like I said, their offensive line is not really great at pass pro. Like, they're not like, oh man, that's a bunch of future high draft picks. It's not the 15 and 17 Notre Dame offensive line. But then you look at the numbers and you're like, wow, they're really good at protecting the quarterback, right? Like, that's the fascinating thing about it is there's some things you look at them and you're like, well, that's not bad. You know how many sacks they've allowed this season? 1. Part of it is, like Notre Dame, Haynes King is, they've avoided some sacks, but overall it's hard to get there because they get rid of the ball quickly.
Yeah.
And because of how much run action they do, you have to respect the run. So you can't go screaming at the quarterback on play action, because you better hope that you don't go screaming at the quarterback and he handed the ball off to Jamal Haynes. Otherwise, it's going to be, as he showed with that walk-off 68-yard touchdown run last week against North Carolina. Yeah. That guy's a threat to score every time he touches the football. He is a really good running back. And the last time you played a running back like him was the last time you lost a football game. And that's the big thing that concerns me. But it's also why this game is such a show-me opportunity for Notre Dame, right? A lot of stuff that Georgia Tech does is really similar to what Northern Illinois does. A lot of pre-snap movement, a lot of, using this motion to get this guy free and to get this, make your linebackers have to communicate all game, put your safeties in binds, slow your defensive line down. And we're going to run right at you also with our talented, short, athletic, strong running back. Sound familiar? That sounds a lot like the Northern Illinois offense. And so this is an opportunity for this defense to say, okay, again, that was a bad day. Can't deny it, can't change it. It was a bad day, but that's not who we are. You struggle with this offense, and it's kind of like, yeah, okay, well, you're a really good team, except when you play teams like this, teams that do this. And now you've given the blueprint for teams that you're going to play the rest of the year or in the postseason of, you want to beat Notre Dame? This is how you do it, right? You want to give that defense problems? This is how you do it. Or you're going to make people say, like, dude, I don't really know what you got to do now to beat that defense, because they had a bad day, but teams have tried that since then and it hasn't worked. You know what I mean? So that chess match between Buster Faulkner and Al Golden is going to be really fun to watch. And it's another game where you need the defensive line to play at their best. And we'll break that down more tomorrow when we dive into some of the statistical matchups. But the other concern for me, Trevor, when you look at this game is, we talk about Leonard Moore individually. Leonard Moore can play and play at a high level. We liked him coming out of high school. He stepped up and played well against Louisville. Now he's got to start doing it consistently, which is a much different challenge. then hey, I got to step up today, and then Christian comes back next week, and then I'm back to being a rotation guy. You're the guy now. Moving forward, you're the guy, and you're going to get challenged a lot. And how are you going to handle that? And I thought he handled it well against Louisville. It's going to be a different animal now, playing in the boundary, where you're going to, a lot of times, one of the reasons why Notre Dame has a boundary corner, Trevor, is because a lot of teams put their best receivers in the boundary. So it's going to be a completely different test. Individually, they can survive losing Benjamin Morrison. Individually, they can survive losing Boubacar Traore. Individually, they can survive losing Jordan Patojo. Individually, they can survive, losing Jason Onye. Individually, they can survive. I mean, just name the injuries we're talking about, and individually, they can survive them all. But my question for you, Trevor, is, or not my question, but my concern that I'm kicking to you is, there's going to be a breaking point. And I talked about this on the show I recorded yesterday. I don't know when that is, where you've just lost too much. You've just lost too much on defense. I don't know that this is it. I don't know that Benjamin Morrison is that injury, but you're now halfway through the season and you've lost 3 starters to season-ending injuries, and another key rotation guy is not playing because of non-injury situations. You're and you've had another guy quit your team in the middle of the season. You're getting to that point now where I just don't know how much more this defense can take. And that's a concern against a team like Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I mean, it's a concern against a team like Georgia Tech, and it's a concern moving forward, to your point. I mean, at some point, the well is going to run dry. And that's no knock on Notre Dame as a team. That is a fact of how many available slots you have on a roster, right? Like, it does give me, it keeps me awake at night. I mean, it's one of those things that you think about, and it's like, okay, it's not good enough anymore to sit back and say, well, in years past, if Notre Dame loses a guy like Benjamin Morrison, we wouldn't have a Leonard Moore and that is still true. But now you're to the point where there are position groups on that defense where you legitimately can't lose anybody else. And
you don't have enough scholarship players
right.
that were recruited to play cornerback to fill out your 2 deep.
Right.
Right now.
Right. And you're going to start asking a lot of kids that have seen very limited playing time. Now, I mean, Leonard Moore, right now he has the opportunity, kind of looking at this on the flip side of the coin, he has the opportunity to put a lot of concerns to rest. Your first start is against a ranked Louisville team at home, where arguably you found out that you were going to be the starting cornerback hours before kickoff because Christian Gray, went through the week of practice and was deemed ungood to go on game day. Your second start is going to be following up a captain's season-ending injury at an NFL stadium against a really good 5-2 Georgia Tech team. So, I want to stay as positive as humanly possible, because at one point in time, Benjamin Morrison was a true freshman that had to come in and start, and we know what he turned into.
He didn't have to, right? He
fair.
earned his role as a freshman. They had Cam Hart, they had Clarence Lewis, they had Tariq Bracy, like they had those guys. He earned that playing time. I understand what you're saying. Jaden Mickey had to play that year once they moved to, at some point in time, but Benjamin earned that spot. But the point is, a freshman came in for whatever reason. And part of the reason Jaden Mickey's gone, part of it, I believe, is because Leonard Moore had already passed him up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that factors into the conversation as well.
Yeah. And to add some context, this does go a little bit beyond Leonard Moore, right? Like, he obviously has the skill set to do it, him as an individual player, but injuries as a whole on this defense are starting to become a major area of concern, because not only do you still have the bulk of your schedule, you have arguably you have some of the grittier games ahead of you. Georgia Tech is a hard-hitting football team that are going to want to run the ball. You want to talk about a hard-hitting football team that wants to run the ball. 7 days after you play Georgia Tech, you go and play Navy, a team that will absolutely run the ball and force running the ball. Yeah. So, there's a lot of concerns coming up down the road to where on a week-to-week basis, Notre Dame can go out and they can beat Georgia Tech with Leonard Moore cornerback. Absolutely. But it's the concerns for me that come down the road, that those are the things that kind of keep me up at night.
Right. It's Salty just had a great analogy. He says it's like playing a game of Jenga, right? where which piece that you pull out is going to cause the whole thing to collapse, right?
Yeah.
And the good news for Notre Dame is they do have a couple games coming up against Army and Navy that are not games that were necessarily going to be big Boubacar Traore games. They were not necessarily games that are geared towards Benjamin Morrison doing what Benjamin Morrison does best.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, even if Benjamin Morrison was healthy, I would have considered maybe putting Jordan Clark at safety or at corner in that game, in run support. So, especially against Army. But it's like you said, it's the cumulative effect of it. And as more guys have to get more snaps, as more guys have to play more because this guy's out, Gabriel Rubio is being thrust into a much bigger role now coming out of his injury than maybe he otherwise would have been with Jason Onye still playing. But now that he's not out there and his issue is not an injury, it's something different. You get what I'm saying? So it's just that cumulative effect of just wear and tear on guys. And, again, that's why it's important for the offense to come out and do their job and hopefully help this defense out a little bit. But you also then have to counter it with, we were kind of concerned about how they were going to handle losing Botelho and Burnham. And then you go out on Saturday and Josh Burnham and Junior Tuilamaka play great football at the Viper position. And it's like, you're just fine. The other thing too is this is actually a game that's geared more towards the strengths of Josh Burnham and Junior Tuilamaka than it actually is Boubacar and Jordan Botelho, because this is a team that is more of you got to have a D-line that can shut down the run than a D-line that necessarily is great at getting after the quarterback. And that's what they do. That may not be true in future games, but that is one of the somewhat blessings of the skill sets of the guys that you have. But the other thing too is guys got to step up. Hey, Christian Gray, you're the guy now. You were kind of the complimentary player to Benjamin Morrison before, right? Like you were the pupil that was learning under the master, so to speak. Well, now you're the veteran at corner. You're the proven guy at corner. Christian Gray is now by far the most experienced player at corner. By far. He's halfway through his sophomore year. He's got five career starts because he didn't start against Louisville. And that's quite a lot to put on him. Don Schuler, you can't have any second half sophomore slump. You got to play at a high level. The nice thing though is so far, this defense has done a great job of next man in. You lost Jack Kaiser at halftime of the Louisville game. Did notice. And I don't mean that as a shot at Jack Kaiser. It just means that's what you want to do, right? We talked about this last year when Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison went down against Pitt. Didn't notice because of how good of a job Jaden Mickey and Christian Gray did in that game. Well, that's not a shot at the starters. That's saying that's a great place to be in where, you lost Christian Gray for the Louisville game. I mean, you noticed, but you said, okay, hey, that kid handled himself and did pretty well, Leonard Moore. But now you're having to replace Benjamin Morrison, and you have to ask yourself, okay, is he ready for that role? We're going to find out. But somebody's got to step up. And the last piece, too, is and I talked about this yesterday, Trevor, do we see any changes from Al Golden in regard to how he structures his defense? For two reasons. One is you don't have Benjamin Morrison anymore. Do you still – because even when you didn't have Christian Gray, you still had Benjamin Morrison. Well, Christian Gray is incredibly gifted. We've talked about that. At times has even been, I thought, better than Benjamin in certain games. Benjamin's been better in other games. They were a great duo. But Benjamin was still Benjamin. I mean, he's still the dude over there playing in the boundary. And, you got to ask yourself, okay, are you going to play as much man coverage as you have all season with Benjamin and Christian? Are you going to have more of a let's defend the pass first, run second, like you have all season against this particular Georgia Tech team? There's a lot of questions about that to say, well, how does Al Golden tweak? You're not going to change. We're going to completely scrap what we've been doing all year because Benjamin Morrison's hurt. Not doing that. But what are some of the tweaks that you can do defensively to say, hey, let's have some snaps maybe where we're protecting Leonard a little bit, or maybe we view Leonard's top skill set as a little differently than Benjamin's, because like how they're using Christian Gray is a lot different than how they used Cam Hart last year. They did a lot of boundary man with field zone and things like some pattern match stuff last year to the field Cam Hart. They're doing more pure man this year with Christian Gray because he's a different player. How do they then adjust to what Leonard does well? That's going to be the question that I'm curious to see is what adjustments do we see from this football team? Do they Do they have times where they put Jordan Clark out to corner and go to their old school 4-2-5 out of 4-3 personnel defense? Or maybe a Jack Kaiser or a Jalen Sneed or a Jaden Osbury's out there playing in the slot against a team like Georgia Tech who wants to run the football, wants to run a lot of perimeter screens, wants to run a lot of jet sweeps. Maybe you're like, you know what? This might be a game where I want Jaden Osbury out there in that nickel spot against what they're doing and not Jordan Clark, who maybe we need to play a little bit at corner at times. Or, those are all aspects of this that I'm curious to see how Al Golden handles these personnel, not even losses, let's just say changes, because the strengths of certain plays before, you had great pass rushers in the boundary, especially with Boubacar, but Jordan Patel was rushing the quarterback very well also early. Now you've got more stout run defenders there. Okay, well, does that change how you play the Viper position? You've now got a 6'2", 290-pound freshman who's pretty fast playing the boundary. Okay, how are you just going to ask him to be Benjamin Morrison, or do you adjust at all? I don't know the answer to that, Trevor, but there has to be some sort of adjustment. It doesn't have to be a major one, just some little tweaks here and there that can kind of say, hey, look, we got to do a better job of making sure we're playing specifically to the talents of the guys that we have. We don't have Boubacar anymore. We don't have Benjamin anymore. We don't have Jordan Patel anymore. We don't have Jason Onye, anymore for now, for this game. So how do you adjust? That's something that I'm going to be fascinated by. Or do you just roll out and say, oh, we're going to keep doing what we're doing? I'm very, very fascinated to see what Al Golden does in this matchup.
I talk a lot about complementary football, and I think that picking up I don't want to say the slack, but the burden, because you don't want to just put all this burden on a true freshman who has one start under his belt. It's like, all right, you're filling in for Ben Morrison. Good luck, kid. Right? There are things that you can do, right? Got you with that.
Good luck, kid.
Good luck, buddy.
Have fun.
Yeah. Best of luck. We'll let you wear number 20 if you want. But one thing that this defense can do is that there are veterans all around on this defense at every level, right? At defensive tackle, you have Howard Cross and Riley Mills. Linebacker, you have Jack Kaiser. In the secondary, you do have Xavier Watts still. And I don't want to say that the Ben Morrison injury is coming at a good time. It's never a good time when you lose a captain and a first-round draft pick on your defense.
And still one of the best corners in the country. I mean,
100%.
I know he hasn't been what a lot of us hoped he would be, like take that next step. But as I pointed out to somebody yesterday who said he hasn't played as well this year, I said, okay, he's holding opponents to a lower completion percentage than he did last year by 5 percentage. He's currently giving up his lowest yards per completion of his career so far this season. And so it's like, okay, well, and he's on pace to allow fewer receiving yards, like in 6 games. If you take what he's allowed in 6 games and project it over 13, he'd allow his fewest yards per game, yards in an entire season of his career. So I think that we need to understand the difference between not playing as well as we hoped he would play and not playing well. And there is a difference. And he hasn't allowed a touchdown all season. And he has allowed touchdowns in the past. So he hasn't intercepted any passes. He's broken up a couple, but he's still played really good football.
Yeah.
With the exception of the Northern Illinois game. And everybody had a bad day against Northern Illinois.
But one thing that you can look at now is, at the very least, the defensive line is starting to come alive right now. One thing that you can do to help out a young cornerback and kind of a young secondary overall outside of Xavier Watts is getting after quarterback and having really good defensive line play so they don't have to drop back into coverage and cover for 7-8 seconds, because that's a really tall order to ask. So we're going to start to see a little bit of what this leadership is going to start to look like on defense. Who's going to be that guy outside of Leonard Moore that says, hey, you're a freshman, man, I got you, right? You're a true freshman. Let me help you out. If you're Riley Mills, if you're Howard Cross, like, I'm coming off of 2 of the best games of the season for myself so far. Us as a duo, the best game of the season so far, by far. We got you, man. We're the captains of this defense. We've been here for 5 years. We'll help you out. Hey, you have Xavier Watts, leader in that secondary. It's like, hey, buddy, we got you. We know the task that you have been handed, and we know what is going to be asked of you. It's our job as guys that have been here forever and elected captains and leaders of this defense to help you out and develop you any way that we can. So going to be really interested to see, on top of what Al Golden does from a schematic standpoint, on the field, personnel-wise, who else is that next guy to step up? Because one thing that injuries do lead to are opportunities for other players who are healthy and ready to go. It's an opportunity for them to step up and say, yo, coach, I got you. We lost this piece. I got it. I got us. And one thing so far up to this point, Notre Dame's defense has done a really good job of doing that. And it's going to have to continue as you get younger and younger and younger. So I'm going to be interested to see how that plays out.
I had somebody say yesterday, Notre Dame can't make the playoff now because no Benjamin Morrison. And Trevor, I'll say this. My feeling on how Benjamin's played this year.
Yeah.
This is I want to be – y'all do know that Notre Dame made the college football playoff as a top 4 seed with Clarence Lewis and Nick McLeod as their starting corners.
Yeah.
So let's pump the brakes a little bit on, they're doomed. They can't make a 12-team playoff because with Leonard Moore and Christian Gray. Now, look, are they another injury away from that happening? Sure. But Texas isn't on their regular season schedule. Ohio State and Oregon aren't on their regular season schedule, right? I mean, like Leonard Moore is still more physically talented than most of the receivers he's going to match up between now and the USC game, right? I mean, like, is it going to be tougher? Is the margin for error smaller? But I'm like, let's just not forget that Notre Dame did make a playoff as a 4 seed in a year where they won the ACC championship regular season with Clarence Lewis and Nick McLeod, who was a nice player for Notre Dame. Glad they had him. So glad they had him. He's a nice player. Wasn't an elite player. Went undrafted despite running a 4.3. Went undrafted. Think about that. He's over 6 feet tall, ran a 4.3 and went undrafted. There's a reason for that. And as much as I'm so glad they had him in 2020, they went to the playoff that year, Trevor. They had a very good defense that year. Like, I'm not saying like they're going to be just fine without Benjamin Morrison. But I am like, hey, let's not pretend like this is the season's over now either. There needs to be a happy medium in this conversation where you're not doom and gloom, all is lost because you lost Benjamin Morrison, who, as you know, I think is a dude in college. I don't know what kind of NFL player he's going to be. I don't care. I don't watch NFL. I know he's a dude in college. You know what I mean? And, but it's not that, Trevor. It's not, gee, they can't go to make a 12-team playoff now because of that,
Right. Well, I mean, and another thing that people need to keep in mind too is if Notre Dame runs the table and when they reach the playoffs, it's not going to be this Leonard Moore from Saturday playing on the Notre Dame defense. It will be a Leonard Moore who has 6 games of starting under his belt, including a game against Georgia Tech, including a game against USC. So, like, I mean, is that going to replace Benjamin Morrison as a whole? No, it's not. Benjamin Morrison's one of the best cornerbacks in all of college football. But it's not they have a true freshman who's not started a single game starting for Notre Dame in the playoffs. It won't be that either. So I'm with
do all these injuries make the ceiling for Notre Dame lower? I think so.
Yeah,
I do. There's no way they can be the team we thought they were going to be preseason without Charles Jagasol, without Ashton Craig, without Benjamin Morrison, without Jordan Patelho, without Boubacar Traore. And I mean, again, we're only 6 games through. Based on the pace we're going at, these aren't the last ones, unfortunately, but they're not at that point yet. But my point at the beginning was there will be a breaking point. I just don't think they're there yet, but we'll find out this weekend against Georgia Tech. That's going to be the interesting part of this, Trevor. We will know if this is it because you'd mentioned it coming at a perfect time. I would have said if it happened a week later, it would have come at a perfect time. Georgia Tech's that last team. I'm like, when I look at Eric Singleton and I see the kind of job he's done this season as a receiver, and when I look at the ability to get the ball in space to Malik Rutherford, who actually leads them in receiving, not Eric Singleton, but I even the Avery Boyd kid at tight end is a solid player that can hurt you if you're not careful. You know what I mean? So you look at it and say, man, there's some matchups there. I would have loved to have had Benjamin Morrison this week. But you don't have them. So what are you going to do? And we're going to find out from Al Golden and Mike Mickens and this defensive staff. What are you going to do? I think you made a great point, Trevor. Who steps up? This is where leaders truly shine. This is where ball players really step up. All right, so we don't have Benjamin. So we have 2 choices as a team. One, we can piss and moan and whine and complain and use it as an excuse for why we don't play to our potential. Or B, we say, okay, we don't have Benjamin. All right, who's going to step up? Well, Leonard, number 1, you got to step up. Go handle your business. But don't worry, we got you because we promise you this weekend the quarterback won't have a whole lot of time to throw the football because we're going to handle our business. Don Schuler say, hey, man, I got you. You don't worry. I'm going to take care of you over the top. I'm going to, you let those guys work those in cuts on you. I'm going to lay them out. We got you. We're going to put them in second and longs and third and longs because we're going to stuff the run. You know what you got to do. That's what teams do, right? You lose guys, who steps up? We saw that in 2015. I mean, by the end of the second game in 2015, Notre Dame had lost their starting nose tackle, Jerron Jones. They'd lost their starting nickel and Sean Crawford. They lost their starting quarterback in Malik Zaire. They lost their starting running back in Torian Folston. They had lost their starting tight end in Durham Smythe, who didn't come back, I think, until the postseason. And there was a couple other injuries that I always forget from that team. But that was a team that was banged up early. By game 2, they were missing all those guys, and they were a pretty darn good football team that year. The only teams that beat them were 3 top 5 teams. And 2 of those games were down to the wire. Game was won or lost in the last minute of the game in the regular season to Ohio State or to Clemson and Stanford. So it's going to be who steps up, who wants it, who's going to say, okay, we're down here, my chance to step up and show that we're going to be okay. And you know who else can help with that a ton? Number 13 on offense. Right? Number 5 on offense, number 10 on offense, number 88 on offense, number 1 on offense, number 4 on offense, number 24 on offense, and all them big boys that weigh over 290 pounds. Right? I didn't want to name all their numbers. That's where it's at. It's like, hey, offense, we need you guys to step up and help us out. Hey, we're handling business over here. We just held Stanford to 7 points without all these dudes. We talked about the Louisville game. Think about all the guys that were missing and still kept Louisville in check and won that football game.
Yeah.
Right. They allowed the offense to kind of go into, run out the clock mode because they knew that they couldn't score enough on their defense to win that football game. Right. So, hey, we've done our part. We need you guys to help us out now. We need you guys to come out of this game and jump on them early, put them behind the sticks, get them out of what they want to do. Because, hey, if we jump up on them like we did Louisville, you can run the ball on us all day. You keep running that clock. Get them out of what they want to do, not just by what we're doing defensively, but by you guys jumping all over them and having that fast start that we're going to talk about in the keys to victory on Thursday, right? That's the thing, is that's team football. Special teams, pin them deep. Pin them inside the 15 every time that the offense can't score. Do what you need to do. That's what great football teams do. It's not just about – this isn't all on Leonard Moore to replace Benjamin Morrison. It's not. It's Leonard Moore's got to replace him, and then everybody else has to step up and raise their level of play. And maybe that is the thing that finally galvanizes this football team to be consistent in their approach to each week. Because you still look at Notre Dame's roster of where it is right now, and you compare it to the next 6 teams that they play, it's still better. It's still better than everybody they play. But can they play to that level, even with the guys that they've lost? That's what we're going to find out, Trevor. And that's what's going to tell us if this is a team that's legitimately a playoff team or not, is how well other people step up and play. Part of the reason that the corners didn't hurt him in 2020, Kyle Hamilton was great that year. Your linebackers were really good that year. Your defensive line stepped up and played big-time football that year. Your offense stepped up when it needed to, right? I mean, you were struggling against North Carolina early in that game. So the offense kept matching them score for score until the defense figured it out, and then you were able to shut them down and you were able to roll. And that's great team football. Can Notre Dame play great team football? They're going to need to win this game. And if they win this game, then we're not going to have this no Benjamin Morrison conversation again until we get to Florida State, because it's not going to be a conversation that really matters as much against Navy. And it's not going to be a conversation that matters much against Army, but against, Florida State, Virginia, and USC, it will matter a little bit more. Got to get through this game with a W. End of the day, Trevor, a W is what they need.
Yep.
Yes, it's be nice to have an impressive resume-building performance, but at the end of the day, 6 and 1 are the only the numbers that matter at the end of the day. If we're being honest, just have a 6 in the win column and a 1 in the loss column at the end of the game, and you're going to be fine.
100%.
And make sure Georgia Tech gets that number 3 in their loss column. At the end of the day, that's what matters. And then you can, have the Navy week and then bye week and figure some stuff out, and then hopefully get rolling the last 4 games. So anything else to add, Trevor, before we get out of here?
Nope. I'm good, man.
Well, hey, look, everybody, thank you all for being with us again. We really appreciate y'all very, very much. Again, happy birthday to Larry Wind. I did not know this. Again, Larry Wind, 65, graduate of Notre Dame, big Irish Breakdown fan. He now is a Shamrock Club member on the board. But I didn't know this either. Yesterday was Tommy Gunn's birthday, T Gunn's birthday yesterday. So my man, Tommy's one of the OGs, man. So we appreciate you very much. Happy birthday. Happy belated birthday to you too, my friend. And stay safe out there on the roads. Everybody, thanks for being with us. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Tonight, 5 o'clock, IB Nation Sports Talk. Trevor, will you be with those guys tonight, or are you gonna be on with Sean at all this week, or are you getting the week off from the night show?
Getting the week off from the night show, I believe. I'll be back on with IB Nation Sports Talk on Monday.
There we go. Week. That's what I'm talking about. So IB Nation Sports Talk, 5 o'clock here on the Irish Breakdown channel, folks. You can always find our written content at irishbreakdown.com if you want to sign up for the premium board where we have our intel, our film breakdowns, our stats breakdowns, all those type of things. That's boards.irishbreakdown.com. So just so you guys are clear, there is a difference. Definitely check all that stuff out. Like I said, I'll have my Stanford breakdown. Part of it will be at tonight. Some more of it will come up tomorrow, late tonight, because of all the craziness of yesterday. We're behind a little bit on that. But the stat breakdown is done, Trevor. I just got to do the video now. And we'll get that done here soon. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thanks for being with us. Trevor, great job today. We'll be with all of you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.